Article 3, Mr. LeBeau.
I move the printed motion under Article 3.
Second.
The printed motion under Article 3 has been moved and seconded. This article proposes to amend the town's general bylaws by enacting a new Article 23 entitled Stretch Energy Code as described in the manager's memorandum. Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Pitney.
Mr. Moderator, the Finance Committee recommends Article 3 unanimously.
Mr. Mizikar, would you provide us with an explanation?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is a new general bylaw that would supplement the energy code that is a part of the general building code and require that new homes and commercial buildings be constructed to a higher energy efficiency standards. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has had a stretch energy code since 2008, and the stretch energy code at that time was substantially different than the base energy code, and it required a significant amount of additional energy efficiency measures when constructing or adding on to any new structures within a community. With the passage of the latest edition of the building code in January of 2017, the current stretch energy code is much closer, much less of a stretch to the base energy code. The difference that remains between the two codes is the approach, and the stretch energy code requires a performance-based approach to energy efficiency versus a prescriptive-based approach, as the base code does. A performance-based approach means that it requires the use of an energy rater consultant throughout the entire design and construction of the building, and it includes a performance test at the end of construction to ensure that the structure meets the energy guidelines that it proposed to do from the outset. The stretch energy code now only applies to new construction. It does not apply to additions or renovations to residential structures. The stretch energy code is one of 5 criteria that the town is seeking approval on in order to become a green community. The other 4 criteria include 2 that the town has already pursued or accomplished, which is zoning permits as right of siting for alternative and renewable energy production and manufacturing facilities, and expedited permitting for such uses. The town still needs to consider the adoption of the stretch energy code this evening, an administrative fuel efficiency vehicle policy, which we have a draft, and a commitment and plan for the municipality to reduce energy consumption by 20% over the next 5 to 6 years in municipal and school buildings. Beyond those commitments, being a green community also makes the town eligible for grants from the state. And these grants would include a non-competitive grant of $180,000 upon acceptance and acceptance into the Green Community Program, and up to $250,000 per year on a competitive basis to implement the measures that we will pursue to reduce our energy consumption by that 20%. And Mr. Moderator, if there are any questions, I might ask for your consideration in acknowledging Mr. Jim Barry, who is here from DOER at the state to help clarify any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments relating to Article 3? Yes, sir. Mr. Ryan.
Bob Ryan, Precinct 7, Colonial Drive. 2 questions. One, not on behalf of John Lukash, but something John Lukash brought up, was regarding the current stretch energy code does not apply to remodelings or additions. What he pointed out was that the code includes future additions, amendments, and modifications there too. So I don't know if Mr. Miskar wants to respond to this. I know you responded to it at FinCom. What happens if they change the law to say it includes additions or modifications to a house? Do we stay in it?
Response, Mr. Mizikar.
Yes, Mr. Moderators. So we will have to abide by any changes that are made at the state level, and those changes are made on a regular basis every 2 to 3 years with the update of the building codes. So the town would have to abide by any changes that are made at the state. A couple considerations to that end. Just as town meeting is considering the adoption of the Stretch Energy Code this evening, you would also have the opportunity to opt out or remove the Stretch Energy Code as a bylaw. It is a bylaw of the town and can be removed in the same way that it is adopted. And I would suggest, given the popularity of this program, with over 200 communities in Massachusetts being a part of the Green Communities program, we have over 200 other allies across the Commonwealth to ensure not only are we attempting to meet the goals of energy efficiency, but we're meeting reasonable standards placed upon all homeowners and businesses across the Commonwealth. So we have other allies in this process as well.
And the second question, maybe the gentleman from the state could answer, what might be the average percentage increase to a builder in order to actually adopt the Stretch Energy Code?
Mr. Mizikar.
If Mr. Barry would be able to answer this question, Mr. Moderator, I would appreciate that.
Sure. Mr. Barry, come on forward up to the lectern. It's Mr. James Barry from the Massachusetts Department of Energy, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Jim Barry. I live in Belchertown, Mass. 8 years ago, I was a member of the Belchertown Board of Selectmen when the Green Communities program was created. I volunteered as a selectman to kind of find out more about it and to see if it was something we should be interested in, because it offered money to do things like repair schools, heating systems and add insulation, things that we knew we had to do and we had no money for. I will suggest to my fellow selectmen, don't be careful what you volunteer for, because as a matter of fact, after I volunteered for that and learned more about it, I ended up getting hired by the state to go from town to town in Hampden, Hampshire, Franklin, and Berkshire County and help explain this program to others, specifically in terms of the extra cost of it. In 2009, when the Stretch Code was first created, it was being compared with the then standard base code, the base energy code, which was built on a 2006 building code. There was a substantial difference in price and in procedure and in application for many builders, and many of them said, wait a minute, what is this going to cost? How are we going to handle this? What's going to do to our town? Are people going to actually build in our town? The price at that point was considered somewhere near $6,000 or $7,000 above and beyond the standard typical home. In 2014, as you know, the standard building code changes every 3 years. It has to comply with the International Energy Commission code. So the base code in 2012 was changed. It didn't really take effect until 2014, and the base code caught up with the then stretch code. So many builders found that they were doing basically what they had been doing for a stretch code. The stretch code was basically in advance of the next standard building code. And so the price difference shrank to like $2,000, $3,000, depending on how the builder chose to comply, because the builder had choices between more insulation to make it more energy efficient, or maybe a more efficient heating system to make it more energy efficient, or maybe better windows to make it more energy efficient. The idea of this performance base is that the builder has options on how to build a whole house, and then the modeling is done to see how energy efficient it is. And as of January 1 of 2017, both the standard building code and the stretch code changed. This was the first time the stretch code changed. So now the difference between the two is minuscule in terms of effort to the builder. The price, there is a bit of a difference. You need to have a slightly better propane heating system than the standard propane heating system. You need to have a better domestic hot water system to make it more energy efficient. So there's still a bit of a difference in cost for those towns that are serviced by a investor-owned utility, unlike your town, and where the people pay into the Renewable Energy Trust. There is money available for what they call the Mass Save program. You may have heard about it if you listen to the Red Sox. They advertise on there all the time for doing home energy projects. But your town is not acceptable to that because you have a much lower electric rate. You're not paying into that service. So the short answer to your question is yes, there's a difference in price. It's not a substantial difference. We have specific analysis on the website. The current governor says no new policies go into effect without doing a cost-benefit analysis. So there's a benefit. There's specific information on the website that talks about a 2,500 square foot home, a 3,000 square foot home, whether it's done with propane or oil heat, or so there is some analysis of that, and it also analyzes the savings to the homeowner. So clearly, if you're doing more energy efficient, you're spending less on electricity and less on heating, so your monthly bills and your annual bills are less. And the analysis, to make a long story short, shows that the cash flow, that the money you pay in energy is less than the extra money you would have paid on a mortgage if you had to pay a little bit more to have the house built to the stretch code.
Thank you. Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Yes, sir. Be right with you, Hannah. Yep.
Yes, Jack Bowles, Precinct 6. A comment, so to speak. This article refers to new construction, to residential and commercial buildings. Now, God forbid, what if these hurricanes come by and cause all kinds of devastation to residential and commercial? They, at that point, would have to upgrade their energy by putting new windows in or whatever is the building code at that time. Am I right or wrong on this? I guess
Response,
through you to Mr. Barry, I guess.
Mr. Barry?
So with or without a hurricane, if you were to have a, what a building inspector might call a complete tear down, and you were to rebuild from scratch, you would build it under the, whatever the regulations were for new construction. Yes, sir.
Okay. What if it isn't a complete demolition here?
In general, my understanding is building officials have the authority to say, you know, half the house got blown off. We're just going to fix it up. It's a renovation. It's not a complete new construction from scratch. I know in my town there was a nice small building right on the corner, and they ended up taking it down to like the one wall of 2x4 so they could call it a renovation. And the building inspector said, "We're not playing that game." If the homeowner disagreed with the building inspector's decision, there is of course an appeal as usual for whatever the building inspector says.
But I just
Further
don't-
questions? Do you have a follow-up?
Please.
Go ahead.
I just don't understand that if, let's say without a devastation, that I want to put on a deck or expand the deck that's on my home now, that I would have to comply with the stretch energy?
No. So the Appendix AA 115 explicitly states it's for new residential construction. It also explicitly states that existing buildings follow code chapter 1 to whatever the chapter and verse is, which is the basic standard building code for renovations and repairs. So if you put an addition on, or a deck, or a garage, or a barn, or a chicken coop like I had to build last summer because my wife insisted on it, the building code it has nothing to do with the stretch code.
Further questions or comments? Mrs. Kane?
Hannah Kane, Precinct 5. I did just want to say that even though we have Selco for electric, if you are a gas customer of Eversource, you actually can access the Mass Save program. And also Selco does offer some energy efficiency items as well, but just wanted to clarify that you can participate in that program in Shrewsbury.
Further questions, comments? Mrs. Nichols? Want to raise your hand so the mic can, yeah, so they can bring the mic to you, Dina.
Dina Nichols, Precinct 7. So I understand, thank you for the explanation on the residential, closing the gap between, it sounds like the standard code is coming very close to the stretch code. So we benefit from working towards being a green energy community while we're really not changing things up that much from what we're probably going to have to do were we to stay with the traditional energy code. I think that's what I understood you're saying. So now what about, I do know oftentimes I will hear in my job builders grumbling a little bit about communities that might have a stretch energy code or excessive energy codes because it's a little bit of an added cost and it's a change from what they might deal with in other communities. But I understand all of that. What about the commercial piece, though, where we're trying to attract commercial? Is the gap between what's expected under standard and what will be under the stretch, is that also a very thin margin between what's expected under standard and what will be implemented? Because we certainly don't want to discourage commercial development.
Mr. Barry.
Thank you. Two things. One is the stretch code only applies to new construction, either residential or commercial. So commercial expansion, commercial renovation, commercial repair would not be infected by a stretch code. In terms of the extra cost of a brand new commercial building in a stretch code community versus a non-stretch code community, I don't have those figures set because commercial buildings are so diverse in structure and size and cost. The basic rule is it has to be 10% better than the ASHRAE Chapter 9.57, whatever those numbers are, the standard code. What I've heard is that designers have not had a problem meeting that, primarily because saving electricity is relatively simple to do in commercial buildings based on lighting. And simply by putting in LED lighting rather than the standard lighting gets them most of the way there. But I don't have dollars and cents specifically for commercial buildings. I apologize.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Yes, sir.
Tom Luby from Precinct 2. Through you, Mr. Moderator, to, I guess, the town manager. Is this bill tonight, or this warrant tonight, to become a green community, or is this just to adopt the stretch code?
Response, Mr. Mizikar.
It is just to adopt the stretch energy code, which is one of 5 criteria that we have to meet in order to apply to become a green community.
So are will we follow
Go ahead.
up, would we be the ones to, or town meeting be able to decide whether to become a green community, or is that something that happens outside of us?
Mr. Mizikar.
So this bylaw is the only thing that comes under the authority of town meeting as it relates to the green energy program, or green communities program, and the 5 criteria. Everything else can be handled at an administrative level.
One more follow?
Go ahead.
The state grants that will be coming through, are there restrictions on how the grant money can be spent in the town? Does it go into the general fund, or does it have to be spent in certain ways?
Mr. Mizikar.
It's spent in order to enable the town to achieve its 20% energy reduction, so it has to be used for specific improvements to town-owned buildings.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments, Mr. Moss?
Brian Moss, Precinct 8. So I just wanted to thank the Board of Selectmen for championing this and bringing this forward so that Shrewsbury, bringing the energy code item forward so that we can eventually become designated a green community. The stretch energy code is essential in us being able to meet our energy reduction goals as a town. And this is important because, as I was saying earlier, as we have this swift transition to 100% renewable energy, how do we meet the, maybe over, if you look at some of those goals of other cities over the next 13 years, how do you meet with renewable energy such as solar and wind the energy consumption of a town? Well, the second pillar in being able to deliver with renewable energy is to reduce your energy consumption. So as you can see, as you implement the stretch code, you're actually, when new residences are built, they're more efficient, they use less energy, they're reducing the consumption of energy, and as well, the town has a 20% reduction plan for their municipal buildings. So we're reducing energy town-wide as well. So as you can see, this fits in nicely with what we're doing is putting renewable energy up to power us. We have this to help reduce our energy consumption so that those renewable energy sources can meet our needs. So I support Article 3. Thank you.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Mr. Molina.
Jason Molina, Precinct 1. While I think the gentleman from Dewar, Mr. Barry, spoke very highly of the program and all that's the history of that program, and I believe also that Mr. Moss has spoken very highly about the reasons why we want to do this. I just want to take the moment now just to acknowledge some of the town meeting members and selectmen that have brought this forward to fruition over the years, that namely being our town meeting member, Missy Hollenbach, who is initially, when this program came to light a few years back, had discussions with the selectmen at the time to just take a look at that program and to see how that would fit into Shrewsbury. Of course, as we've already heard earlier, that the program was a little hard to swallow at that point, and so something that not to move forward on. In the past year or so, we've also had town meeting member Brian Moss, who also revisited it to know that the stretch code was certainly not much of a stretch, and through his efforts as well, in speaking and collaborating with the Board of Selectmen, raising the fact that the stretch code had changed had caused more of a conversation to be brought forth in here. This is just more examples of how town meeting members can become active members of this community, because that's our point, is to be up here and to engage in the community along with the selectmen, along with other members, finance committee, et cetera, to ensure that we are working for this community at large. And also want to thank Selectman DiPaolo for his efforts as well in speaking fondly of this program, certainly at the open forum that happened earlier this year at the Board of Selectmen, and certainly in other venues as well. So I thank all three members for their dedication to this effort, and I certainly support this article. Thank you.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? Mr. Shake.
Rashid Sheikh, Precinct 10. This is certainly a great program and a great effort from a lot of people, and I certainly support the program. However, I have few concerns or questions. I think as far as the comment is concerned, I actually voluntarily have been using and beneficiary of the program, because I see there is a little cost. However, there are a lot of benefits, like you can get a lot of free LED lights from the Mass State program, that Energy Save program. You can also get some other benefits. So there are, and you make the house more energy efficient and it's more marketable. So there are a lot of other benefits. So I think it's a great program. However, my concern is that what is the time frame to educate people who are, who may be affected from the program if we pass this stretch code? What is the time frame we have, for the implementation? And then in the implementation process, are we looking at, is it going to, put more burden on our, building inspector office, which is already, has a long lead time for setting up any inspection? So how do we have any kind of implementation plan and education plan, and what is the time frame if we approve that tonight? Thank you.
Mr. Mizikar.
So the bylaw would go into effect July 1st, 2018, so there is some lead time to prepare for that. In my conversations with the building inspector, a lot of residential homes that are being constructed in the community are already being constructed in this fashion. So the additional workload and burden, given that fact, and the lack of stretch between the two codes, would not provide any additional burdens upon the office.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 3? There being none, and this motion requiring a majority vote to pass, would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 3 please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes